Armed men kicked through the hospital door and opened fire on wounded soldiers lying on stretchers. A masked gunman grabbed a young Navy corpsman by the throat and threw him against the wall like a rag doll. Blood sprayed across the floor. Patients screamed. And in that chaos, in that slaughter, a woman in civilian scrubs picked up a dead man's rifle, stepped into the open, and started dropping attackers with the precision of a trained killer. Controlled pairs, headshots, no hesitation. The Navy SEALs on that base had spent 7 months calling her the contract nurse. They mocked her. They dismissed her. They shut her out of every briefing. But in the next 40 minutes, that woman would fight harder than any operator on the base, save every wounded man in that hospital, and reveal a secret that would leave the most elite warriors in the world standing in silence. Her name was Staff Sergeant Rachel Donovan, United States Marine Corps. And nobody knew. If this story hits you the way I know it will, subscribe right now and follow me to the very end. Comment your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. Rachel Donovan got the call at 4 in the morning, and she was already sitting up in bed because Rachel Donovan hadn't slept through a full night in 3 years, not since Fallujah. She picked up the phone and listened. Meridian Defense Medical, Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Texas-Mexico border, embedded with a Navy SEAL platoon, 6-month contract, trauma nurse, civilian status, no weapons, no tactical involvement, no access to classified briefings. She said, "Understood." She hung up and sat in the dark of her Tucson apartment, and her eyes drifted to the nightstand where 2 faces smiled back at her from a photograph. 2 young women in Marine combat utilities, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like death couldn't find them. One was Rachel. The other was Corporal Maria Reyes. Maria's daughter had just turned 5. Maria never saw it. Rachel touched the glass over Maria's face. "I'm going back," she said. "Not for medals, not for anyone's approval. I'm going back because somebody's best friend is out there right now, and I'm not letting her die the way you did." She packed one bag. She tucked the photograph between her folded scrubs, and she told no one who she really was. Here is what Rachel Donovan's full military record contained, and here is what she buried so deep that not a single human being at FOB Sentinel would ever see it. 8 years, United States Marine Corps, enlisted at 17, 2 combat deployments to Fallujah, 170 patrols outside the wire, Bronze Star with Combat 5 for Valor, awarded after she carried a wounded Marine named Gutierrez 400 meters through a kill zone while returning fire with her sidearm. The citation said she refused to leave him. The truth was simpler than that. She never even considered it. She was trained in human intelligence collection. She built targeting packages that guided joint special operations raids. One of those packages, the one she assembled over 11 days of source meetings and pattern analysis in Al Anbar province, led directly to a raid that saved an entire SEAL element from a complex ambush. That SEAL element was led by a young operator named Ethan Cole. He got a Silver Star. She got a line in a classified report that nobody outside of a SCIF would ever read. And then Maria died, not from a bullet, not from a bomb. Maria caught shrapnel during a mortar attack, and the wound was survivable. Every surgeon who reviewed the case later said the same thing, survivable. But the field medic on that helicopter panicked. His hands shook so bad he couldn't pack the wound. He fumbled the gauze. He forgot his training. And Maria Reyes, who had survived 2 deployments, who had a daughter named Sophia waiting at Camp Pendleton, bled to death at 30,000 feet because one person's hands weren't steady when it mattered. Rachel held Maria's hand when she died. She felt it go cold. She felt the exact moment the grip loosened and there was nothing on the other end. 6 weeks later, Rachel left the Corps. She didn't leave because she was broken. She left because she understood something that changed everything. The bullet doesn't always kill you. Sometimes it's the person next to you who can't do their job. Sometimes the thing that kills you is somebody else's fear. She enrolled in nursing school. She graduated first in her class. She worked trauma wards in Phoenix and Tucson, and she was the calmest person in every room she ever entered. And nobody knew why, and she never told them. Then she applied to Meridian Defense Medical and requested a combat zone assignment. The recruiter asked her why a civilian nurse wanted to go to a forward operating base. Rachel said, "Because that's where people die when someone isn't ready." The recruiter didn't ask any more questions. FOB Sentinel sat in the desert like a clenched fist. Rachel stepped off the transport, felt the heat slam into her, and kept walking. Fallujah in August made this feel like a parking lot in Phoenix. She didn't mention that. She didn't mention anything. The base surgeon, Commander Alan Park, met her in the medical building. He was tired. She could see it in the way his shoulders curved forward. Too many shifts, not enough staff, 2 surgeons, 1 anesthesiologist, 3 nurses, and a corpsman who had never seen real blood outside a training dummy. "The corpsman's name is Dylan Hayes," Park told her. 21 years old, smart kid, good heart, but he's green, Rachel. I need you to sharpen him. I will. And listen, the SEAL team here, they're a closed circle. Senior Chief Cole runs a tight ship. He doesn't trust contractors. Had a bad experience. Don't take anything personally. I never do. She met Dylan Hayes 1 hour later, and the kid practically stood at attention when she walked in. He had freckles and nervous eyes and hands that moved too fast, touching everything, adjusting equipment that didn't need adjusting. "Ma'am, I want you to know I've studied every protocol cover to cover. I scored 94 on my field med exam. I know my stuff." "Sit down, Dylan." He sat. "Don't call me ma'am. Call me Rachel. And let me ask you something." She pulled a roll of gauze from the shelf and placed it on the table between them. "A man comes through that door. Femoral artery is open. Blood is hitting the floor in pulses. Your hands start shaking. What do you do?" "Apply direct pressure. Pack the wound with..." "No, before that, before your hands even move." He stared at her. "You breathe. 1 breath. Just 1. Because right now your brain is panicking, and a panicking brain sends panicking signals to your hands, and panicking hands can't pack a wound, and a wound that doesn't get packed kills your patient. 1 breath resets everything. That 1 breath is the difference between a phone call that says your husband is coming home and a knock on the door from 2 Marines in dress blues." Dylan's face changed. The eagerness drained out and something serious took its place. "Who taught you that?" "Someone who's not here anymore." Rachel pushed the gauze toward him. "Pack this wound. Show me." He didn't ask again. He packed the wound. She corrected his hand position, his pressure, his speed. She made him do it again, and again, and again until the gauze was soaked and his fingers ached and he was doing it right. "Good. Tomorrow we do it in the dark." "In the dark?" "Bombs don't wait for the lights to come on, Dylan." Day 3 on base. Rachel was in the trauma bay restocking shelves when she heard boots. Not 1 pair, 3. Heavy, deliberate, the walk of men who own every room they enter. Senior Chief Ethan Cole filled the doorway. 2 of his operators flanked him. Torres on the left, a man they called Bishop on the right. Cole didn't look at her like a person. He looked at her like a problem. "So, you're the contract nurse." "That's right. Let me be real clear with you. My men get hurt, they come to this room. And the person standing in this room better be worth a damn, because I already know what happens when they're not." "Then you know why I take this seriously." "Do you?" "Because in my experience, contractors take the paycheck seriously. The job, not so much." He stepped closer. "You ever been shot at?" Rachel lined up a row of chest seals on the shelf without looking at him. "Have you ever sutured a chest cavity while someone's screaming?" Torres almost smiled. Bishop coughed. Cole's jaw tightened. "I asked you a direct question." Now Rachel turned. She looked at him full on, and there was something in her eyes that stopped the room cold. Not anger, not defiance, something older than both. Something that had been forged in a place that Cole, for all his combat experience, might recognize if he looked closely enough. Senior Chief, I'm here to do one thing. Keep your men alive if they come through that door broken. That's my job. That's my only job. And I'm going to do it whether you trust me or not. Trust is earned. Then watch me earn it. Cole held her stare for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked out. Torres lingered in the doorway, studying her. He's not personal about it, Torres said. He just carries Daniels with him everywhere. He should, Rachel said. That's what loss is supposed to do. Make you carry it so you never drop someone else. Torres tilted his head. You sound like you know something about that. Everybody knows something about that. He left, but something stayed with him, a feeling he couldn't shake, that this woman was not what her badge said she was. Rachel started reading the daily threat briefs the next morning. They were posted in the operations center, unclassified summaries that most medical staff walked past without a second glance. Rachel didn't walk past them. She stood in front of the threat board every morning for 20 minutes, reading patterns, tracking movement, cross-referencing locations. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, the intelligence officer, noticed on day 5. Most nurses don't read threat maps. Most nurses haven't buried friends. Chen leaned against the doorframe. You read them like you understand them. Not just the words, the patterns. Patterns keep people alive. Where did you learn to read patterns like that? Rachel turned a page on the brief. Life. Chen wasn't buying it. She was an intelligence officer. Reading people was her job. And this woman, this quiet contract nurse with the steady hands and the flat effect and the eyes that never stopped scanning, did not compute. But Chen also knew when to push and when to wait. She waited. 12 days in, Rachel was sitting with the threat brief and a cup of cold coffee when she saw it. The change was subtle. 3 local informants who had been providing regular updates to the intelligence team had gone silent. All 3, within 5 days of each other. Surveillance reports showed small groups of military-age males at observation distance from the south perimeter. Drone activity had increased along a specific corridor, and patrol routes had been probed 3 times in the past week. Short contacts, quick withdrawals, testing response times. Rachel's stomach dropped. She knew this playbook. She had seen it in Al Anbar province in 2007. When your sources go dark and the watchers multiply, it means one thing. They're not watching anymore. They're planning. She went straight to Dr. Park. We need to prepare for mass casualties. Park put down his pen. Excuse me? The threat indicators have shifted. Informants are dark. Surveillance has increased on the south side. Patrol probes are escalating. Someone is building toward an attack. Rachel, the official assessment is low threat. I know what the assessment says. I also know that the assessment is wrong. That's a strong statement from a contract nurse. Rachel put both hands on his desk and leaned forward. Doctor, I have stood in a room where the official assessment said low threat. And 4 hours later, I was holding my best friend's hand while she bled to death because nobody prepared. I am asking you, not as a contractor, but as a human being who has watched people die from unpreparedness, let me stage this trauma bay for mass casualty. Park looked at her for a long time. He didn't understand threat patterns. He didn't understand intelligence indicators. But he understood the look in her eyes. That was not the look of someone guessing. That was the look of someone who had been right before and been ignored before and had paid for it with someone she loved. What do you need? Extra blood products, double our chest seal inventory, surgical airway kits at every station. And I need 48 hours to drill the medical team until they can do this in their sleep. That's a significant resource expenditure for a low-threat environment. It's a significant waste of life if I'm right and we're not ready. He signed the authorization. Rachel transformed the trauma bay over the next 2 days. 3 triage zones. pre-positioned surgical kits, backup lighting. She ran Dylan through mass casualty drills that made him sweat through his uniform. During the third drill, she simulated a chest wound with arterial spray. Dylan's hands seized up. His fingers curled and his breathing went ragged, and his eyes got that look, the look Rachel had seen on 100 faces in 100 bad moments. Dylan, her voice cut through his panic like a knife through tape. Look at me, not the blood, not the wound, me. He looked at her. One breath. He breathed. Now pack the wound. His hands moved, shaky at first, then steady, then fast, clean pressure, correct placement. Again. She made him do it 7 times. By the 7th time, his hands didn't shake at all. You just saved a man's life 7 times, Rachel told him. Remember this feeling. When the real thing happens, and it will happen, your hands will remember what your brain forgets. Dylan looked at her with something new in his eyes. Not the nervous eagerness of a kid trying to impress. Something deeper. Trust. Rachel, who are you really? I'm the person who's going to make sure you're ready. Word reached Cole that the contract nurse was running mass casualty drills and stockpiling trauma supplies. He came to the medical bay like a storm with boots. Who authorized this? Dr. Park. Based on what? The threat level is low. Based on my assessment that the threat level is wrong. Cole laughed. It was a short, hard sound with no joy in it. Your assessment. A civilian nurse is making threat assessments now. Someone has to. That someone is my intelligence team, not a contractor with a stethoscope. Rachel stopped what she was doing. She faced him and said something that hit harder than she intended. Harder than anything she'd said since arriving. Senior Chief, I have put people in the ground. I have held hands that went cold while someone told me everything was low threat and under control. And I promised myself I would never stand in a room and let that happen again because someone with authority told me not to worry. So you can question my credentials. You can question my background. You can question my place on this base. But do not question my judgment about when people are about to die, because that is the one thing I have never been wrong about. The room went silent. Torres, who was standing behind Cole, felt the hair on his arms rise. Bishop shifted his weight. Even Cole, who had faced down insurgents and enemy fighters in death itself, felt something in that moment that he couldn't name. This woman was not afraid of him. She was not intimidated by him. And the weight behind her words was not the weight of someone who had read about combat. It was the weight of someone who had bled in it. Cole said nothing for 10 seconds. Then he said, if you're wrong, you've wasted resources and time. If I'm right, I've saved your men. He walked out. But he didn't order her to stop. And that was the first crack in the wall. That night, alone in her quarters, Rachel opened the small box she kept at the bottom of her bag. The bronze star sat on a bed of velvet, the Combat V device catching the dim light. Below it was a folded letter. Maria's handwriting, messy, rushed, alive. Rach, if something happens to me, don't you dare stop. Not with a gun, with your heart. You're the strongest person I know, and the world doesn't need you behind a wall. It needs you out there, where it counts. Promise me. Rachel folded the letter and put it back. She reached under her mattress and pulled out the Beretta M9. She checked the magazine. 15 rounds. She checked the chamber. Clear. She slid it back. Then she dropped to the floor and did 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 10 minutes of shadowboxing. Her strikes were crisp, precise, military. The body remembers what the badge doesn't show. She sat on the edge of her bed and listened to the desert silence, and the silence was wrong. Too deep, too still. The same silence she had felt in Fallujah before the worst night of her life. 3 days. She could feel it. Something was coming for this base, and when it arrived, it wouldn't care about threat assessments or clearance levels or who wore a uniform and who wore scrubs. It would only care about one thing. Who was ready? Rachel Donovan checked her weapon one more time, set her alarm for 4 a.m., and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She hadn't slept through a full night in 3 years. But she rested, the way a Marine rests, light, alert, one sound away from standing. 72 hours later, at exactly 3:47 a.m., the south wall of Forward Operating Base Sentinel disappeared in a column of fire and shrapnel. And the screaming started, and the gunfire started, and the only person on that entire base who was already on her feet, already moving, already calm, was the contract nurse that nobody trusted, and nobody noticed, and nobody knew. And the promise she made to a dead woman was about to be kept in blood. The blast hit at 3:47 a.m., and Rachel was already standing. She had been awake for 11 minutes, sitting on the edge of her cot, boots laced, Beretta under her waistband, staring at the wall. Her body had woken her the way it always did before something terrible. No alarm, no sound, just a feeling deep in her gut that pulled her out of sleep like a hand yanking her from water. Then the south wall blew apart. The concussion wave knocked supplies off shelves and threw the trauma bay door open. Dust filled the air. The lights flickered twice and died. Emergency generators kicked in 3 seconds later, flooding the room in red. Rachel was already moving. She grabbed Dylan Hayes by the shoulder before the kid even understood what had happened. He was on the floor, tangled in his blanket, eyes wide, mouth open, the kind of frozen that gets people killed. Dylan, get up, right now. What happened? What was? We're under attack. Get to the trauma bay. Do exactly what we drilled. Nothing more, nothing less. Rachel, I can't, I don't. She grabbed his face with both hands, her palms pressed against his cheeks, and she forced his eyes to lock with hers. You can. You will. Because there are men bleeding right now who need your hands to be steady. Breathe. He breathed. Again. He breathed again. Move. He moved. Rachel reached the trauma bay 14 seconds after the explosion. She flipped on the backup surgical lights she had pre-positioned 2 days ago. She ripped open the first triage kit. She laid out chest seals, tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, and surgical airway tools in the exact order she had drilled 100 times in Fallujah and a dozen times on this base. Gunfire erupted outside, not random shots, coordinated automatic fire from multiple positions. South perimeter, east flank, overlapping fields of fire, textbook complex ambush. Rachel recognized the pattern in her bones before her brain even processed it. Then the first SEAL came through the door. Torres. He was dragging his left leg. His thigh was torn open, and blood was pumping out in rhythmic spurts. Arterial. He had a tourniquet half applied above the wound, but his hands were slick with blood, and he couldn't cinch it. Torres, sit down. I can still fight, just patch me up and... Sit down now. She grabbed the tourniquet, positioned it 2 inches higher, and cranked it until Torres screamed. The bleeding slowed to a seep. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, applied pressure, and wrapped it tight. 45 seconds. 1 patient stabilized. Torres grabbed her arm. They breached the south fence. At least 15, maybe 20. They're heading for the hospital. Rachel didn't react the way a civilian should have reacted to that news. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She simply nodded and said, "How long before QRF responds?" Torres stared at her. Quick reaction force. That was military terminology, tactical terminology, not something a contract nurse should know, let alone use instinctively. 20 minutes, maybe more. Comms are jammed on primary frequency. Secondary? Cole's working it. Rachel pointed at Dylan, who was standing at his station, pale but upright, hands shaking but positioned correctly. Dylan, take over Torres. Keep pressure on that wound. If the bleeding restarts, crank the tourniquet 1 more turn. Talk to him. Keep him conscious. Okay, Rachel. Don't say okay, say copy. Copy. The second SEAL came through the door at 3:51. Bishop. He was carrying a third man over his shoulder, a younger operator named Reeves, whose face was gray and whose chest was making a sound Rachel hadn't heard in 3 years. A sucking chest wound. Open pneumothorax. Air entering the chest cavity through the hole, collapsing the lung. Bishop dropped Reeves on the table, and his hands were shaking. Bishop, the man who had jumped out of helicopters into gunfights, whose hands had never trembled in 12 years of special operations, was shaking. "He's not breathing right. Something's wrong with his chest. Fix him. Fix him now." Rachel ripped open Reeves' body armor and saw the wound. Entry wound right side, between the 4th and 5th rib. Every time Reeves tried to inhale, air whistled through the hole instead of going through his airway. She slapped a chest seal over the wound. Vented. The seal created a one-way valve, letting trapped air escape but preventing new air from entering. Reeves' breathing stabilized within 10 seconds. But his oxygen was dropping. His lips were turning blue. The lung was already partially collapsed, and the seal alone wouldn't be enough. Rachel grabbed a 14-gauge needle and looked at Dylan across the room. "Dylan, what do I do for a tension pneumothorax?" She was testing him. Even now, even in this. Dylan's voice cracked, but the answer came. "Needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line." "Good. Watch me." She drove the needle into Reeves's chest. A rush of air hissed out. His oxygen climbed. His color started coming back. Bishop watched the whole thing with his mouth open. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" "Nursing school," Rachel said without looking up. That was a lie. She learned it in a blown-out building in Fallujah, on her knees, covered in someone else's blood, with a Marine sergeant screaming instructions in her ear while mortar rounds shook the walls. At 3:54, a bullet punched through the metal wall of the trauma bay and buried itself in the supply cabinet 6 inches from Rachel's head. Dylan hit the floor. Rachel didn't move. She finished securing Reeves' IV line, taped it, checked the drip rate, and only then looked at the hole in the wall. "Dylan, get back on your feet. They're shooting at us. They've been shooting at us since this started. You're still alive. Your patient is still alive. Stay on your feet and keep working." Another round came through the wall. Then another. The attackers were targeting the hospital deliberately. Rachel understood what that meant. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated. Take out the medical facility, and every wounded man on this base dies. At 3:56, Cole's voice crackled over the emergency radio that Rachel had mounted on the wall. His voice was controlled but tight, the voice of a man fighting hard and losing ground. "All stations, this is Sentinel Actual. Multiple breaches south and east perimeter. Enemy count estimated 20 plus. QRF is 30 minutes out. I need every able body on the line. Hospital, lock down and shelter in place." Rachel looked at the door. She looked at Torres, who was gritting his teeth on the table. She looked at Bishop, who was checking his rifle magazine. "Bishop, how many are pushing toward us?" "Last I saw, 6 to 8 coming through the east corridor." "Where's your nearest fighting position?" Bishop stared at her. "Lady, why are you asking me tactical questions?" "Because if they reach this door, everyone in this room dies." "Where is the nearest fighting position?" "There's a sandbag barrier 20 meters east, but there's nobody manning it. Everyone pulled back to the main compound." Rachel made a decision in that moment that crossed every line a civilian contractor was supposed to respect. She reached under the surgical table and pulled out the Beretta M9. Torres saw it first. "What the hell, you have a weapon?" "I have a lot of things you don't know about." At 3:59, a Marine security NCO named Sergeant First Class Gomez burst through the trauma bay door. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye and carrying 2 rifles. He looked at Rachel, looked at the Beretta in her hand, and something passed between them that didn't need words. "You know how to use that?" Gomez asked. "Better than most people in this building." Gomez was Marine Security Force. He had an instinct for his own kind. Something in the way Rachel held that weapon, something in her stance, the way her finger sat along the frame instead of on the trigger, the way her eyes tracked the door and the walls simultaneously. "Who are you?" he asked. "Right now, I'm the only thing standing between those men on those tables and the people trying to kill them." Gomez held out the M4 rifle. "Take it. The M4 has more range." Rachel took the rifle. She checked the magazine. 28 rounds. She charged the weapon. The sound of the bolt slamming forward filled the room, and every person in that trauma bay heard it, and every person understood that something fundamental had just changed. Dylan looked up from Torres's side. His face was white. "Rachel, what are you doing?" "My job, Dylan. Keep pressure on that wound." She turned to Gomez. "How many between us and the East Barrier?" "I counted 4 moving through the motor pool." "Flanking?" "Possible. They're using the vehicles for cover." Rachel looked back at Dylan one more time. "If anyone comes through that door who isn't wearing an American flag, you take Torres's sidearm and you defend your patients. Understood?" Dylan's hands were shaking, but he looked at Torres, who gave him a nod. And something hardened in that kid's face. Something Rachel recognized because she had felt it herself a long time ago. The moment you stop being scared and start being responsible. "Copy," Dylan said. Rachel stepped out of the trauma bay into a corridor filled with smoke and noise and chaos, and she moved the way she hadn't moved in 3 years. Low, fast, weapon up, scanning corners, checking sectors. Gomez was behind her. He watched her move, and he knew. He didn't need a personnel file. He didn't need a DD-214. The way this woman moved through a combat zone told him everything her badge didn't. "Marine?" he said. "Once. Once a Marine, always, not now, Sergeant." They reached the east corridor at 403. 2 attackers were moving between vehicles, advancing toward the hospital. Rachel dropped to one knee, steadied the M4 against a concrete barrier, and controlled her breathing. One breath. The same breath she taught Dylan. She fired twice, controlled pairs. The first attacker dropped. The second dove behind a truck. Gomez engaged the second target from a flanking position. Down. 2 more appeared from behind the motor pool. Rachel shifted, acquired, fired. 1 dropped. The 4th retreated. Gomez looked at her. "Nursing school doesn't teach that." "No, it doesn't." At 406, they pushed to the sandbag barrier, and Rachel took a position covering the east approach. From here, she could see the south perimeter, where the main assault was concentrated. Cole's team was engaged in a vicious firefight. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like strobes. She could hear Cole on the radio, calling positions, directing fire, doing what a senior chief does when his base is being overrun. Then a voice she didn't expect came over the radio. A panic voice. The base surgeon, Dr. Park. "Medical emergency. We have 2 more wounded coming in. Trauma bay is overwhelmed. Hayes is alone. I need Donovan back here now." Rachel looked at the east approach. 2 more attackers were advancing. She looked back toward the hospital. She covered 20 meters in under 5 seconds and came through the door to find Dylan on his knees between 2 tables, one hand on Torres's wound and the other trying to stop a new patient from pulling out his own IV. "Rachel, he's crashing. His pressure is dropping and I can't." "Which one?" "Reeves. The chest seal is leaking." Rachel was at Reeves' side in 2 strides. She ripped off the failing seal, applied a new one, and reassessed. The lung was collapsing again. The needle decompression wasn't holding. She needed to do a chest tube. Right now, in a field hospital, under fire. She grabbed a scalpel, made a lateral incision between the ribs, pushed a tube into the pleural space, and connected it to a drainage system she had improvised from IV tubing and a water bottle. Air and blood rushed out. Reeves's chest expanded. His oxygen climbed. Dylan watched her do it in under 90 seconds. "That's not a standard nursing procedure," he whispered. "No, it's not." At 411, 2 more wounded came through the door. One was a Marine security guard with shrapnel wounds across his back. The other was a SEAL named Hawkins with a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Gut shot. He was conscious and in agony. Rachel triaged in 3 seconds. Hawkins first. The gut wound was potentially fatal without surgery, but she could stabilize him. The Marine's shrapnel wounds were painful, but not immediately life-threatening. She worked on Hawkins. IV access, fluid resuscitation, pressure dressing on the wound, pain management. She kept talking to him the entire time. Hawkins, stay with me. Talk to me. Tell me something. It hurts. I know. What's your wife's name? Lisa. You're going to call Lisa tomorrow. Hear me? Tomorrow. Promise? I don't make promises. I make guarantees. Now hold still. She packed the wound. Hawkins screamed. She held him down with one hand and packed with the other. Dylan came alongside and assisted without being asked. His hands were steady. His face was focused. The drills had taken hold. At 4:14, the gunfire outside intensified. Rachel heard Gomez's M4 firing in rapid succession. Then silence. Then more firing. The east approach was getting hit hard. She made another decision that broke every rule. She turned to Dylan and put both hands on his shoulders. I need to go back out there. Gomez is alone. If that position falls, they come straight through this door. Rachel, you can't keep going back and forth. You're one person. Dylan, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. You are ready. Everything I taught you, every drill, every breath. This is what it was all for. You handle the patients. I handle the door. Trust yourself. I trust you. Then trust what I taught you because that's the same thing. She took the M4 and went back out. At 4:17, she reached Gomez's position and found him reloading behind the sandbags with a wound on his left arm that he was ignoring. You're hit. Flesh wound. Let me see. Later. We've got 4 more coming from the south. Rachel took position, shouldered the M4 and waited. Her breathing was steady. Her heart rate was controlled. She was Staff Sergeant Donovan again, not the ghost of her, the real thing. Every cell in her body remembered. The attackers came around the corner of the motor pool in a 2x2 formation. Trained, disciplined, not amateurs. Rachel fired. Gomez fired. 2 dropped, 2 scattered. One of them threw a grenade. Rachel saw the arc, grabbed Gomez by the collar, and pulled him behind the barrier. The blast showered them with dirt and shrapnel. A piece of metal sliced Rachel's forearm. She felt it. She ignored it. She rose, acquired the 3rd attacker, and fired 3 rounds. He went down. The 4th ran. Gomez was breathing hard beside her. Blood was running down his arm, and now hers was running too. They looked at each other. What's your name? Gomez asked. Your real name. Staff Sergeant Rachel Donovan, United States Marine Corps. Gomez almost laughed. I knew it. I knew the second you picked up that weapon. Keep it to yourself for now. Yes, Staff Sergeant. At 4:22, Rachel keyed the tactical radio and said the words that would change everything. This is Anvil. Staff Sergeant Rachel Donovan, USMC. East perimeter is secured. 4 enemy KIA. Hospital is holding. I need suppressive fire on the south approach and medevac in 15 minutes. Dead silence on the radio. Then Cole's voice. Quiet. Disbelieving. Say again your call sign and rank. Anvil, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. And Senior Chief, your east flank is clear because I cleared it. Now get me that medevac. 2 seconds of silence that felt like a year. Then Cole said, copy, Anvil. And in those 2 words, everything that Senior Chief Ethan Cole had believed about the contract nurse, everything he had assumed, everything he had dismissed, collapsed like a building with no foundation. Rachel didn't wait for the moment to land. She was already running back to the trauma bay because Reeves' chest tube needed checking, and Hawkins's blood pressure was dropping, and Dylan was alone, and the fight wasn't over. She burst through the door. Dylan was exactly where she left him, hands steady, eyes focused, doing everything she taught him. Status. Torres is stable. Reeves's oxygen is holding at 92. Hawkins is dropping. I started a second line. Good. You're doing good, Dylan. She went to Hawkins. His skin was cold and gray. She checked his abdomen, rigid, internal bleeding. He needed surgery, real surgery, not field triage. How long until medevac? She called out. Torres answered from his table, gritting through pain. Cole said 15. Hawkins doesn't have 15. She turned to Dr. Park, who had been working on the shrapnel patient in the corner. Doctor, I need you on Hawkins. Exploratory laparotomy, right now. Park looked at her, looked at the room. Bullets were still hitting the walls. In here? We don't have a choice. Park hesitated for 1 second. Then he washed his hands in the basin, pulled on gloves, and picked up a scalpel. Rachel assisted. She held retractors, suctioned blood, and clamped bleeders while Park worked inside Hawkins' abdomen. 11 minutes later, Park found the source, a lacerated mesenteric vessel. He clamped it, sutured it, and packed the cavity. Hawkins' blood pressure stabilized. Rachel looked at the clock, 4:38. She walked back to the east door, checked the perimeter, and saw headlights in the distance. Helicopters. The sound of rotors cutting through the pre-dawn air. Medevac was 2 minutes out. She walked back inside, put down the M4, washed the blood off her hands, and picked up a fresh pair of medical gloves. Dylan watched her do it. The transition from warrior to nurse in the time it took to snap on latex. He shook his head. Who are you? He asked. The same question he had asked weeks ago, but this time it meant something completely different. Rachel pulled the gloves tight and checked Reeves's chest tube. I'm the person who made sure you were ready, Dylan. And you were. At 4:41, the medevac helicopters touched down. The gunfire had stopped. The remaining attackers had been killed or had fled. FOB Sentinel was holding. The hospital was intact. Every patient inside it was alive. Every single one. Rachel stood in the doorway of the trauma bay, her arm bleeding, her scrubs soaked in other people's blood, the M4 leaning against the wall behind her, and the medical gloves still on her hands. Gomez walked past her, holding his wounded arm, and nodded. Semper Fi, Staff Sergeant. She nodded back. Cole's voice came over the radio one final time that night. All stations, Sentinel actual. Bases secure. All enemy neutralized. Begin casualty collection and damage assessment. Then a pause. A long pause. And then, Anvo, report to the command post at 0600. Rachel pulled off her gloves. She checked each patient one more time. She adjusted Reeves's oxygen. She tightened Torres's bandage. She squeezed Hawkins' hand and told him Lisa was going to get that phone call. Then she sat down on the floor of the trauma bay, leaned her head against the wall, and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, to listen. The base was quiet again. The kind of quiet that comes after violence. Heavy, ringing, full of things that haven't been said yet. And in 4 hours, Rachel Donovan would walk into the command post, and a room full of Navy SEALs would learn that the woman they had ignored for 7 months had just saved their brothers, secured their flank, and fought with the kind of precision that only comes from one place, the United States Marine Corps. And the man who had thrown her name across the room on her first day would have to stand in front of her and reckon with the fact that the intelligence package that earned him his Silver Star, the one that saved his life and the lives of his entire element years ago in Al-Anbar province, had been built by the same hands that tonight held his wounded men together. Rachel Donovan sat on that floor with blood drying on her arms and a letter from a dead friend folded in her pocket. And she didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel proud. She felt Maria, close, present, like a hand on her shoulder that wasn't there. And she whispered, so quietly that no one in that room could hear, "Nobody died tonight, Maria. I kept my promise." Rachel didn't move from that floor for 47 minutes. She sat with her back against the wall, blood drying on her forearms, the cut on her left arm throbbing in time with her heartbeat. She could hear the medevac helicopters lifting off, the heavy chop of rotors fading into the pre-dawn sky, carrying Hawkins and 2 other critical patients to a level 1 trauma center 60 miles east. She could hear boots moving outside, the careful, controlled movement of men clearing the perimeter, checking bodies, securing the base. She could hear Dylan breathing. He was sitting 3 feet from her, on the floor, his back against the opposite wall. His hands were resting on his knees. They were still, completely still. And that was the thing that hit Rachel harder than anything that had happened in the last hour. Those hands had been shaking 12 hours ago during a drill. Now, after the real thing, after blood and gunfire and chaos, they were steady. "You did good tonight, Dylan." He didn't answer right away. He was staring at the floor between his boots, where a pool of someone's blood had dried into a dark stain. "I didn't freeze," he said quietly. "No, you didn't. I wanted to. When that first bullet came through the wall, every muscle in my body wanted to drop and curl up and disappear. But you didn't. Because of you. Because you told me to breathe." Rachel closed her eyes. "You told yourself to breathe. I just reminded you once. Everything after that was you." Dylan looked at her then, really looked at her, and the question was in his eyes before it was on his lips. "Rachel, the things you did tonight, the way you moved out there, the way you talked on the radio, Staff Sergeant, USMC, I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you?" Rachel opened her eyes. She looked at this kid who had just become a man in the space of 40 minutes, who had kept 3 wounded operators alive with hands that shouldn't have been steady but were. And she made a decision. "Not now, Dylan. Later. I promise. But not now." He accepted it, not because the answer didn't matter, but because he trusted her enough to wait. At 5:30, Dr. Park came into the trauma bay. He had washed the blood off his hands, but not off his uniform. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 2 hours. He walked to Rachel, looked down at her, and extended his hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet. "The cut on your arm needs sutures. I'll do it myself." "Rachel." "Fine." He sat her on a stool and cleaned the wound. It was a 4-inch laceration from the grenade shrapnel. He irrigated it, applied local anesthetic, and began suturing with the steady precision of a man who had done 10,000 stitches. While he worked, he talked. Quietly, so only she could hear. "I pulled your full personnel file 30 minutes ago. I called Meridian Defense Medical and told them I needed your complete background for the after-action report. They sent it encrypted." Rachel said nothing. 170 combat patrols, Bronze Star with Valor, Human Intelligence Collection, targeting packages for Joint Special Operations. He paused, pulling a stitch tight. "You built the intel package for Operation Crimson Gate." Rachel's jaw tightened. That was classified, or it had been. That operation saved a SEAL element in Al-Anbar province. The element leader received a Silver Star. Park tied off a stitch and looked at her. "The element leader was Ethan Cole." "I know. You knew this entire time." "Yes. And you never said a word. Not when he disrespected you. Not when he called you a liability. Not when he tried to have you removed from the medical rotation." "He tried to have me removed?" "Week 2. I denied it." Rachel absorbed that. Cole had tried to get rid of her. The man whose life she had saved from a desk in Al-Anbar province had tried to kick her off the base. And she felt nothing about it. No anger, no bitterness, because she hadn't come here for Ethan Cole's approval. She had come here for Maria. Park finished the last stitch and covered the wound with a clean dressing. "Rachel, I have to include your full background in the after-action report. The commanding officer will read it. Cole will read it. Everyone will know." "I understand. Is there anything you want to say before that happens?" Rachel looked at him. "Yes, Make sure the report says Dylan Hayes performed under fire with distinction. That kid saved lives tonight. Park almost smiled. I'll make sure. At 5:52, Rachel walked to the showers. She stood under cold water for 6 minutes. She watched blood, some hers, most not, swirl down the drain. She pressed her forehead against the wall and let the water hit the back of her neck, and she allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of feeling everything she had suppressed for the last 2 hours. The fear, the anger, the grief that never fully leaves. The sound of Maria's voice in her memory saying, "Don't you dare stop." 60 seconds. Then she turned off the water, dried herself, put on clean scrubs, and became the contract nurse again. At 6 o'clock sharp, she walked into the command post. The room was full. Cole was there. Torres, his thigh bandaged, was sitting in a chair against the wall, refusing to be evacuated. Bishop stood by the map board. Lieutenant Commander Chen was at the intelligence desk. Gomez was there with his arm in a sling. Dr. Park stood near the door, and 12 other personnel, SEALs and support staff, filled every remaining space. Every single one of them looked at Rachel when she walked in. The room went dead quiet. Colonel David Mercer, the base commander who had arrived by helicopter 20 minutes earlier, stood at the head of the table. He was holding a file. Rachel recognized it by thickness. That was her file, her real file. "Miss Donovan, take a seat." "I'll stand, sir." Mercer studied her for a moment. Then he opened the file and began reading. Not to himself, to the room. Staff Sergeant Rachel Donovan, United States Marine Corps, 8 years of service, 2 deployments to Fallujah, Iraq, 170 combat patrols, MOS 0231, intelligence specialist, with secondary qualification in combat field medicine. Bronze Star with Combat V for Valor. Awarded for actions on November 14, 2007, during which Staff Sergeant Donovan carried a wounded Marine 400 meters through hostile fire while engaging enemy combatants with her sidearm. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Staff Sergeant Donovan was the primary intelligence analyst for Operation Crimson Gate, a joint special operations mission in Al-Anbar province. Her targeting package identified a complex ambush intended for a Navy SEAL reconnaissance element. The intelligence she provided enabled the element to preempt the ambush and neutralize hostile forces. The element leader was subsequently awarded the Silver Star. Mercer looked up from the file. He looked at Cole. Cole wasn't moving. His face was carved from stone. But his eyes were doing something Rachel had never seen in 7 months on this base. They were uncertain. The element leader, Mercer said slowly, was Senior Chief Ethan Cole. The silence in that room became something physical, something that pressed against the walls and the ceiling, and every person standing in it. Torres turned his head and stared at Cole. Bishop's mouth opened slightly. Chen closed her eyes and shook her head, the way a person does when a puzzle they've been working on suddenly reveals its picture. Cole said nothing. Mercer continued. After separating from the Marine Corps, Miss Donovan obtained her nursing degree and contracted with Meridian Defense Medical for forward deployment assignments. She arrived at FOB Sentinel 7 months ago as a civilian trauma nurse. He closed the file. Last night, during the attack on this installation, Miss Donovan stabilized 4 critical patients, performed an emergency surgical procedure under fire, armed herself, engaged and neutralized enemy combatants on the east perimeter, and coordinated tactical communications that directly contributed to the defense of this base. He set the file on the table. "Are there questions?" Torres spoke first. "So the person who saved my life last night also saved the senior chief's life 3 years ago, and none of us knew." "Correct. And she's been here for 7 months, getting treated like a liability, and she never said a word." "That appears to be the case." Torres looked at Rachel. "Why?" Rachel met his eyes. "Because I didn't come here to prove anything to anyone. I came here to do a job." "But you could have shut all of us up on day 1. You could have thrown that bronze star on the table and told Cole to his face that you saved his team. And then what? You trust me because of a medal? You trust me because of a piece of paper? That's the same mistake Cole made when he trusted the last contractor. Good resume, good credentials, and when it mattered, the man hid and someone died. She paused. I don't want trust based on paperwork. I want trust based on what I do when the lights go out and the blood hits the floor. Gomez, standing by the wall with his arm in a sling, said quietly, Semper Fi. Rachel glanced at him. He nodded. She nodded back. Mercer turned to Cole. Senior Chief, do you have anything to say? Every eye in the room moved to Cole. This was the man who had thrown her name across the room, who had called contractors cowards, who had tried to have her removed, who had judged her every single day for 7 months, based on a badge and a set of scrubs. Cole stood up. He was a big man, broad shoulders, thick neck, hands that had killed people and saved people and carried coffins. He walked across the room toward Rachel, and every person in that command post held their breath. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't salute. He stood there and looked at her. And what happened in his eyes in those seconds was the thing that nobody in that room would ever forget. The wall came down, not slowly, not in pieces, all at once, like a demolition charge going off behind his face. I tried to get you removed from this base. I know. I called you a liability to your face. You did. And you built the package that saved my life and 4 of my men in Al-Anbar. And you've been walking around this base for 7 months knowing that, and you never once threw it in my face. It wasn't mine to throw. Why not? Because it wasn't about you, Senior Chief. It was never about you. Cole's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. But in that silent room, every word carried. Who was it about? Rachel reached into her pocket. She pulled out the folded photograph. 2 young women in marine utilities, arms over shoulders, grinning. She held it up so Cole could see. Her name was Maria Reyes, Corporal, USMC. She survived 2 deployments. She had a daughter named Sophia. She died on a medevac helicopter because the field medic froze and couldn't pack a wound. Rachel's voice stayed level, but something beneath it cracked, just slightly, like ice over deep water. I became a nurse because of her. I came here because of her. And nobody died last night because of her. Cole looked at the photograph for a long time. He recognized something in that image. Not the faces, the bond. The same bond he had with every man in his platoon. The bond that makes you carry someone else's weight when your own legs are breaking. I misjudged you, he said. You didn't misjudge me. You judged the badge, the scrubs, the clipboard. You saw what you expected to see because the last time you trusted a contractor, it cost you someone you loved. I understand that. I don't blame you for it. You should. I lost someone too, Senior Chief. I know what it does to you. It makes you build walls so high you can't see who's standing on the other side. But walls don't keep people safe. People keep people safe. Cole's chin dipped, just barely. The closest thing to a bow that a man like him would ever offer. Staff Sergeant Donovan. It was the first time he used her rank. The first time he acknowledged what she was. And the way he said it, with weight and gravity and something that sounded a lot like respect, forged in the hardest possible way, meant more than any medal or citation ever could. Senior Chief Cole, he extended his hand. She took it. And in that handshake, in the grip of 2 warriors who had saved each other's lives without ever knowing it, something broke open that was bigger than both of them. Bigger than rank and branch and badge, and every stupid wall that human beings build between themselves and the people who are trying to help them. Torres started clapping, then Bishop, then Gomez, then the whole room. Rachel didn't smile. She didn't cry. She squeezed Cole's hand once, released it, and turned to Mercer. Colonel, I have one request. Name it. Petty Officer Third Class Dylan Hayes performed under fire last night with exceptional skill and composure. He stabilized 3 critical patients, maintained triage protocols during active combat, and made clinical decisions that directly preserved life. He should be recognized. Mercer nodded. It'll be in the report. And Colonel, he did it because he was trained, not because he was lucky. He was trained. That matters. Noted, Staff Sergeant. Rachel turned and walked toward the door. She had patients to check. Torres needed a wound evaluation. Reeves' chest tube output needed monitoring. And she wanted to find Dylan and tell him what had just happened in this room before he heard it from someone else. She was almost at the door when Chen caught her arm. I knew something was off about you. The way you read those threat briefs, the way you predicted this attack. You should trust those instincts, Commander. They're good. You could have told me. Would it have changed anything? Chen thought about it. No, I suppose not. You would have done everything exactly the same. Then it didn't need to be said. Rachel walked out of the command post into the morning light. The base was damaged, vehicles burned, the south wall was rubble. But the hospital stood, and every person who had been inside it when the shooting started was still breathing. She found Dylan in the trauma bay. He was restocking supplies. His hands were moving with a calm efficiency that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. When he saw her, he stopped. I heard. Torres told me everything. The Bronze Star, the patrols, Operation Crimson Gate, Cole's Silver Star. He shook his head. You were a Marine this whole time. I'm still a Marine, Dylan. Why didn't you tell me? Rachel sat down on the stool where Park had sutured her arm. She looked at this kid, this 21-year-old from Ohio, who had joined the Navy because his grandfather carried a legacy, and she gave him the only answer that was true. Because if I told you I was a combat veteran with a Bronze Star, you would have listened to me because of what I was. Instead, you listened to me because of what I taught you. And what I taught you saved 3 men's lives last night. Not my rank, not my medals, what you learned. That's the difference between respect and trust, Dylan. Respect is easy. Trust is earned in the dark. Dylan's eyes were wet. He blinked hard and looked away. My grandfather used to say something. He said the best corpsman he ever served with in Vietnam was a man nobody noticed until everyone was dying. And then that man was the only one standing. Your grandfather was a smart man. He would have loved you. Rachel felt something loosen in her chest, something tight and old and heavy that she had been carrying since the day she left the Corps. Tell me about him sometime. I will. She stood up and put her hand on his shoulder. You're not green anymore, Dylan. After last night, you're not green. He straightened. Something in his posture shifted. Not the nervous kid who stood at attention on day one. A corpsman, a medic who had been tested and hadn't broken. Copy, Staff Sergeant. She almost smiled. Almost. At 9:15, Rachel went back to her quarters. She closed the door. She sat on her cot and opened the small box. The Bronze Star on its velvet. Maria's letter beneath it. She unfolded the letter and read it again, even though she knew every word by heart. Rach, if something happens to me, don't you dare stop. Not with a gun, with your heart. You're the strongest person I know, and the world doesn't need you behind a wall. It needs you out there, where it counts. Promise me. Rachel folded the letter. She placed it back in the box. She placed the photograph of her and Maria on the nightstand where she could see it. Then she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears running down her face in the quiet of a room that smelled like antiseptic and gunpowder. Tears for Maria. Tears for Gutierrez, the Marine she carried through Fallujah. Tears for every person she had saved and every person she couldn't. Tears for the version of herself that had walked into this base 7 months ago, carrying all of it alone. She cried for 4 minutes, then she washed her face, put on fresh scrubs, and walked back to the trauma bay. Because there were patients who needed checking, supplies that needed restocking, and a young corpsman who still had things to learn. At 1100, Torres hobbled into the trauma bay on crutches. He wasn't supposed to be walking. Rachel gave him a look that could have stopped a convoy. "Get back in bed." "Can't," came to say something. He balanced on his crutches and looked at her with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and admiration. That first day, when Cole said those things about contractors, I was standing right there. I didn't say anything. I should have. "You didn't know." That's the point, isn't it? I didn't know because I didn't look. None of us did. We saw scrubs and a contractor badge, and we decided you were less. That's on us. Torres, you were doing your job. You trusted your team leader's judgment. That's not a flaw. No, but not seeing what's right in front of you because you already decided what it is. That's a flaw. And I won't do it again. He extended his fist. Rachel looked at it for a moment, then she bumped it with hers. "Welcome to the team, Anvil," Torres said. "I was always on the team. You just didn't know it." He laughed. It hurt his leg and he winced, but he laughed. And Rachel watched him hobble out of the trauma bay, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time on a military installation. She felt like she belonged, not because they finally knew her rank, not because they read her file, but because she had stood in the fire with them and come out the other side, and that fire had burned away every label and every assumption and every wall. And what was left was the only thing that ever really mattered. When everything falls apart, the only question is whether your hands are steady. Rachel Donovan's hands had been steady her entire life. And now, finally, the people around her knew why. But knowing the truth and living with it are two different things. And what came next, what unfolded in the days and weeks after that night, would test Rachel Donovan in ways that combat never did. Because fighting an enemy is simple. The enemy tries to kill you, and you try to survive. But earning a place in a family that rejected you, finding purpose after the promise is kept, learning to let people in after years of carrying everything alone, that is the battle that has no end and no easy victory. And Rachel was just beginning to fight it. The first change happened at noon on the day after the attack, and it was so small that most people would have missed it. Rachel was walking from the trauma bay to the supply tent when she passed the SEAL team's ready room. The door was open. It had never been open when she walked by before. In 7 months, every time Rachel passed that door, it was shut, locked. A closed world that civilian contractors did not enter. Today it was open. And Torres, sitting inside with his leg elevated on a chair, saw her and called out, "Anvil, you eat yet?" She stopped. "Not yet." "There's coffee in here, real coffee, not that powdered garbage from the mess hall." Rachel stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that carried the weight of 7 months of closed doors and cold stares and being called the contract nurse, like the words tasted sour. She walked in. Bishop was there, cleaning his weapon at a table. He looked up, nodded, and went back to his work. A younger SEAL named Prescott, who Rachel had barely spoken to before, pulled out a chair for her without saying a word. Torres poured her coffee, black. He didn't ask how she took it because he had watched her drink coffee in the trauma bay at 3 in the morning for 7 months, and he had noticed, even when he pretended not to. "How's the arm?" Torres asked. 12 stitches. I'll live." You perform surgery under fire with 12 stitches in your arm, and you say you'll live. Most people would be on a stretcher milking it for sympathy. Most people didn't grow up Marine infantry. Bishop looked up from his weapon. "What MOS?" 0231, intelligence. But I cross-trained with the grunts every chance I got. Why? Because intelligence doesn't mean anything if you can't survive long enough to use it. Bishop nodded. That answer made sense to him in a way that no credential or file ever could. It was the answer of someone who had lived in the same world he lived in. Prescott leaned forward. He was 26, from Virginia Beach, and he had a question that had been burning in him since the briefing. Staff Sergeant, can I ask you something? Rachel, and yes, when you keyed that radio and called yourself Anvo, where did that call sign come from? Rachel took a sip of coffee. Fallujah, second deployment. My squad leader gave it to me after I carried Gutierrez through that ambush. He said I absorbed everything that hit me and never broke. Like an Anvo. Torres shook his head. You carried that name for years, and nobody here knew. A name doesn't mean anything unless you earn it again every day. At 14:30, Lieutenant Commander Chen found Rachel in the supply tent doing inventory. Chen walked in, closed the flap behind her, and stood there with her arms crossed, and an expression that said this conversation was going to happen whether Rachel wanted it or not. I need to talk to you about the intelligence indicators. Okay? You identified the attack pattern 72 hours before it happened. You read threat briefs that most medical staff ignore, and you extracted actionable analysis that my own team missed. I need to understand how. I told you, I read patterns. Rachel, Staff Sergeant, whatever you want me to call you, I'm the intelligence officer on this base, and I had a low threat assessment posted when you were staging for mass casualties. You were right, and I was wrong, and I need to know what I missed so it doesn't happen again. Rachel put down the clipboard. She respected Chen. The woman was sharp, professional, and honest enough to stand in front of someone and admit she had made a mistake. That took more courage than most people understood. You didn't miss anything in the data. The data was there. What you missed was the context. Explain. 3 informants going dark in the same week. That's not a coincidence. That's either intimidation or elimination. Either way, it means someone on the other side is cleaning house before an operation. You flagged it as a communication disruption. I flagged it as a precursor because I spent 2 years in Al Anbar watching exactly that pattern precede every major attack. Chen absorbed this. And the patrol probes? Short contacts with quick withdrawal. They weren't engaging. They were timing. How fast do we respond? From which direction? With how many? They were mapping our reaction. My team assessed those as harassment. Your team hasn't been in a place where harassment turns into a funeral. I have. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Rachel. I want you in my briefings. I'm a contractor. You're a Marine intelligence specialist with more combat pattern analysis experience than half my team combined. I don't care what your badge says. I care about not getting people killed. You'd have to clear it with Cole. I already did. Rachel blinked. That was the second crack. Cole had approved her access to classified intelligence briefings. The man who had tried to have her removed from the base 3 weeks ago was now opening doors he had personally locked. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 0600. I'll be there. Chen turned to leave, then stopped. Rachel, for what it's worth, if I had listened to you 3 days earlier, we might have had air support on standby. We might have had the QRF pre-staged. People still would have been hurt, but maybe not as badly. You listened when it mattered. That's what counts. That's generous. No, that's practical. Guilt doesn't protect anyone. Learning does. At 1600, something happened that Rachel did not expect and was not prepared for. She was checking on Reeves in the recovery area. His chest tube was draining properly, his oxygen was stable, and he was conscious for the first time since the attack. When she walked in, his eyes tracked to her and stayed there. You're the one, he said. His voice was thin, raspy from the intubation. I'm the one what? Bishop told me, you did the chest tube, under fire, kept me alive when my lung was collapsing. Dr. Park did the hard work on Hawkins. I just don't. Reeves' hand came up off the bed and grabbed her wrist. Weak but deliberate. Don't minimize it. I was dying. I know what dying feels like because I felt it. And then someone cut into my chest and I could breathe again. That was you. Rachel didn't pull her hand away. She let him hold her wrist, and she looked at this man, this SEAL operator who had been through things that most human beings couldn't imagine. And she saw in his eyes something that she hadn't allowed herself to look for in a very long time. Gratitude so deep it had no words. "You're going to be fine, Reeves. Full recovery. The tube comes out in 3 days and you'll be back annoying your team in a month." "Staff Sergeant Donovan." "Yes. Thank you." 2 words, the simplest 2 words in the English language. But the way he said them, with everything he had left, with the weight of a man who understood exactly how close he had come to never saying anything again, those 2 words hit Rachel harder than the grenade shrapnel. "You're welcome," she said, and she meant it in a way she had never meant anything. At 1800, the base held a formation. Colonel Mercer stood in front of the assembled personnel, the damaged south wall visible behind him, and read commendations. He cited the SEAL team's defense of the perimeter. He cited the Marine Security Force. He cited Dr. Park's surgical actions. Then he said, "I am also recognizing the actions of Miss Rachel Donovan, civilian contractor, Meridian Defense Medical. Mrs. Donovan's actions during the attack demonstrated extraordinary valor, medical expertise, and tactical proficiency that directly contributed to the survival of wounded personnel and the defense of this installation." Mercer looked at Rachel, who was standing at the edge of the formation in her scrubs. "However, it has come to my attention that Ms. Donovan's civilian contractor status does not accurately reflect her capabilities or her background. Effective immediately, I am requesting a temporary reactivation of Staff Sergeant Donovan's military status through a reserve recall provision, pending approval from Marine Corps Personnel Command." Rachel's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't asked for this. Staff Sergeant Donovan, if approved, would serve in a dual capacity as medical and intelligence support for the duration of this deployment. The formation broke into murmurs. Torres caught Rachel's eye and gave her a nod. Bishop straightened. Dillon, standing with the medical staff, looked like he might burst. Rachel stood perfectly still. Reactivation. Return to active status. Wearing the uniform again. The eagle, globe, and anchor that she had set aside 3 years ago when she decided that saving lives mattered more than taking them. After the formation, she found Mercer. "Colonel, I didn't ask for reactivation." "I know. I came here as a civilian for a reason. And that reason got 4 of my people to the worst night of their lives. But I've got a base that's been hit, a threat environment that just escalated to critical, and a woman standing in front of me who is hands down the most capable person on this installation. I need you operational, Staff Sergeant, not as a contractor, as a Marine. I left the Corps because I couldn't save my best friend, and you came back because you can save everyone else. That's not running from the uniform, Rachel. That's honoring it." She didn't answer right away. She stood there in the fading light and felt the weight of that decision pressing on her from both sides. The nurse who had promised herself she would heal, not fight, and the Marine who had fought her whole life and couldn't stop. "Can I have 24 hours? "You can have 12. The threat isn't waiting." She nodded and walked away. At 2000, she sat in her quarters with the photograph in her hand. Maria and Rachel, Fallujah, 2007. 2 women who thought they were invincible. She called Maria's mother. She hadn't called in 8 months. She owed her that, and more. Carmen Reyes picked up on the second ring. "Rachel, is that you?" "It's me, Carmen. How's Sophia?" "She's 8 now. She looks just like her mother. Same eyes, same stubborn chin." Rachel closed her eyes. "Carmen, I need to tell you something. Are you okay?" "I'm on a forward operating base. There was an attack. I'm fine, but they've asked me to put the uniform back on." Silence on the other end. Then Carmen's voice, heavy and careful. "And what did you say?" "I haven't said anything yet. I'm asking you." "Why are you asking me?" "Because I left the Corps for Maria. I became a nurse for Maria. Everything I've done for 3 years has been for Maria. And now they're asking me to be a Marine again, and I need to know if that betrays the promise I made. Carmen Reyes was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice cracked but held. Rachel, my daughter didn't die because you were a Marine. She died because someone wasn't ready. You spent 3 years making yourself ready. You spent 3 years making other people ready. That's not a betrayal. That's the promise being kept in a way Maria would have understood better than anyone. Carmen, listen to me. My daughter loved you. You were her sister. And if she were standing in front of you right now, she would grab you by the shoulders and say, Rachel Donovan, you put on that uniform and you go save every life you can. And you stop carrying me like I'm a weight. I'm not a weight. I'm a wing. Rachel's throat closed. She pressed her hand over her mouth and breathed through it. Are you there? Carmen asked. I'm here. Then go be a Marine, mija, and come home safe. I will. She hung up. She sat in the dark for 15 minutes. Then she stood, opened her locker, and pulled out the one item she had brought that nobody ever saw. Folded at the bottom of her bag, beneath everything else, was a set of Marine combat utilities, desert pattern, faded, worn soft from 100 washes and 100 patrols and 100 nights sleeping in the dirt. She had carried them to every assignment since she left the Corps. She never wore them. She never took them out, but she never left them behind either, because leaving them behind would have meant letting go of something she wasn't ready to release. Rachel held the uniform against her chest and felt the fabric under her fingers. And for the first time in 3 years, it didn't feel like a ghost. It felt like skin. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Rachel walked into the command post wearing Marine combat utilities with her rank insignia on the collar. Staff Sergeant, USMC. The room noticed. Every person in that room noticed. Cole was standing at the map table. He turned, saw her, and for 1 second his face showed something unguarded. Not surprise, recognition, like he was finally seeing the person who had been there all along. Staff Sergeant Donovan reporting as requested. Mercer nodded. Welcome back, Marine. Chen handed her a classified threat brief, full classification, no more unclassified summaries. Rachel opened it and began reading. Within 4 minutes, she identified 3 data points that changed the operational picture entirely. Commander Chen, these surveillance patterns along the southern corridor aren't random. They're sequential. Someone is building a second targeting package. The attack 3 nights ago wasn't the main event. It was a proof of concept. The room went cold. Explain, Mercer said. The attack tested our response time, our QRF capabilities, and our medical capacity. They now know how fast we react, from which directions, and how many we can treat. If I were planning a follow-up, I would hit us harder, from a different axis, and specifically target our ability to evacuate casualties. You're saying we're going to be hit again. I'm saying someone is planning to hit us again, and this time they'll know our playbook. Cole stepped forward. What do you recommend? It was the first time he had ever asked her for tactical input, not medical advice, not a nursing opinion, a tactical recommendation from one warrior to another. Change everything. Response routes, QRF staging, communication frequencies, medical evacuation protocols. If they mapped our reactions, we give them a new map that doesn't match. How fast can you build a new pattern analysis? Give me access to the full intelligence feed in 12 hours. Cole looked at Mercer. Mercer nodded. You've got it, Cole said. Then he added something that made Torres almost fall out of his chair. And Donovan, I want you in our tactical planning sessions going forward, not as medical support, as an intelligence advisor. Rachel nodded. Copy, Senior Chief. At 9:30, Rachel was in the intelligence center, working through communications intercepts when Dylan found her. He stood in the doorway and stared at her uniform like he was seeing a stranger. You look different. I feel different. Is it weird wearing it again? Rachel ran her hand along the fabric of her sleeve. It's like putting on a language you stop speaking. Your mouth remembers the words before your brain does. Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always? Now that you're back in uniform, now that you're doing intelligence work and tactical planning and all of that, are you still going to be in the trauma bay? She heard what he was really asking. Are you leaving me? Dylan, listen to me. I wear this uniform, but my hands still belong in that trauma bay. My job didn't change. It expanded. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving those patients. I will be in that trauma bay every shift, and I will be at your side every time someone comes through that door bleeding. That's not a maybe, that's a fact. Promise? I don't make promises, I make guarantees, remember? He smiled. It was small and shaky, but real. Copy, Staff Sergeant. And Dylan, when I'm in the trauma bay, I'm still Rachel. The rank stays at the door. Understood. At 1300, Rachel delivered her intelligence assessment to the command team. 12 pages. Pattern analysis, threat vectors, predicted timelines, recommended countermeasures. Chen read it twice and said it was the most comprehensive tactical assessment she had seen from any analyst on the base, military or otherwise. Cole read it once and started implementing changes immediately. At 1500, Torres found Rachel in the chow hall. He sat across from her and placed something on the table between them. It was a patch. SEAL team insignia. Unofficial. The kind that team members give to people they consider part of the family. You can't wear it on your uniform, Torres said. Regs and all that, but it's yours. Rachel picked it up. The fabric was worn. It had been on someone's gear before. Whose was this? Torres's face tightened. Daniel's, the guy we lost, the one Cole carries. Rachel held the patch carefully. Torres, I can't take this. You didn't let me finish. I talked to Cole about it. He's the one who told me to give it to you. Rachel looked up sharply. Cole gave you Daniel's patch, for me. He said Daniels would have wanted the person who saved this team to carry something of his. He said you earned it the way Daniels would have respected, not by talking, by doing. Rachel ran her thumb over the stitching, a dead man's patch, given by the team leader who had once tried to throw her off the base, carried to her by a man whose life she had saved with a tourniquet in steady hands. Tell Cole I'll carry it. Tell him yourself, he's in the ready room. Rachel put the patch in her breast pocket, over her heart. She walked to the ready room. Cole was alone studying maps. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. Torres gave me the patch. I know. You didn't have to do that. No, I didn't. But Daniels died because someone wasn't ready when he needed them. You made sure that didn't happen again. Not for my team, not for Dylan, not for anyone on this base. Daniels would have recognized that. He would have respected it. I wish I could have been there for him. You were there for everyone else. That's the next best thing. Rachel touched the patch through her uniform fabric. Senior Chief, the follow-up attack I'm projecting, it's going to be worse than the first. I know, and this time, I won't be sitting in the trauma bay waiting. I'll be in the fight from the beginning. I know that too. Are you okay with that? Cole looked at her for a long time, and then he said something that completed a journey that had started 7 months ago when he threw a clipboard across a room and called her a liability. Donovan, I don't just trust you in the fight. I trust you to lead it. Rachel held his gaze. 2 warriors, 2 branches, 2 people who had spent 7 months on opposite sides of a wall that should never have been built. Then let's make sure when they come back, they regret it. Cole almost smiled. Almost. Hoo-yah! Rachel walked out of the ready room with Daniel's patch over her heart and a battle plan forming in her head and the weight of a dead friend's letter in her pocket. She passed a mirror in the corridor and caught her own reflection. Marine Utilities, Staff Sergeant insignia, the same face that had worn civilian scrubs 48 hours ago. But the eyes were the same. Had always been the same. Because the uniform was never what made Rachel Donovan dangerous. What made her dangerous was the thing that no badge could show and no file could contain. A promise to a dead woman that every life within her reach would be fought for with everything she had, and the fight was far from over. At 2100, Rachel returned to her quarters. She placed the photograph of Maria on the nightstand. She placed Daniel's patch beside it. Two people she never met at the same time. Two lives that ended because someone wasn't ready. Two ghosts that lived in the choices she made every single day. She opened Maria's letter one more time. Don't you dare stop. Not with a gun, with your heart. Rachel folded the letter, held it against her chest, and whispered into the empty room. I'm not stopping, Maria. I'm just getting started. Then she set her alarm for 4 o'clock, placed the Beretta on the nightstand next to the photograph, and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. It never did. But readiness did. The kind that lives in your bones and never turns off. The kind that made Rachel Donovan the most dangerous person on FOB Sentinel. Not because she could fight, not because she could heal, but because she would never, ever stop doing both. Rachel's intelligence assessment was right. She knew it would be. She had hoped she was wrong. At 2:15, 6 days after the first attack, the communications intercepts spiked. Chen called Rachel to the intelligence center and showed her the feed. Encrypted transmissions across 3 frequencies, all converging on coordinates less than 4 miles from FOB Sentinel. This is it, Rachel said. How long do we have? Based on the staging patterns, 36 to 48 hours. They'll hit us at night. They'll come from the west this time because they know our east and south response is hardened. You're sure about west? It's what I would do. The south wall is rebuilt and reinforced. The east perimeter has new fighting positions, but the west approach has a drainage culvert that runs under the fence line. It's big enough for a man to crawl through. They know about it because they've been watching us for 2 weeks. Chen stared at the map. We never flagged that culvert as a vulnerability. They did. Rachel brought the assessment to Cole and Mercer at 3 o'clock. The command post was quiet, the kind of quiet that exists before people start making decisions that will determine who lives and who dies. 48 hours, Rachel said. West approach. Estimated force is larger than the first attack. 25 to 30. They'll target the culvert for infiltration and use a vehicle-borne explosive on the main gate as a diversion. Cole studied the map. His jaw was working. Rachel had seen that jaw before. It was the jaw of a man calculating odds and not liking the numbers. What's your recommendation? Ambush the ambush. Let them think we don't know about the culvert. Stage a reaction force inside the west compound. When they come through, we close the door behind them and end it. Mercer leaned forward. That's aggressive. They hit our hospital last time, Colonel. They targeted wounded men on stretchers. Aggressive is the appropriate response. Cole looked at her. Something passed between them that didn't require words. The understanding of 2 people who had both been on the wrong end of an ambush and knew that the only way to survive the next one was to become the ambush. I want Donovan on the tactical element, Cole said to Mercer. She's medical and intelligence. She's a Marine combat veteran who cleared my east flank with a borrowed rifle while performing surgery between engagements. She's on the tactical element. Mercer looked at Rachel. Staff Sergeant, are you willing? I volunteered for this deployment, Colonel. I didn't specify which parts. Then you're in. At 6 o'clock, Rachel briefed the full tactical plan. 12 SEALs, 6 Marine Security Force. Rachel as intelligence advisor embedded with the reaction element, Dylan and Doctor. Park in the trauma bay, pre-stage for mass casualty. Every detail of the base's response pattern was altered. New routes, new positions, new communication protocols. If the attackers had mapped the old playbook, they were going to walk into a book they had never read. After the briefing, Rachel found Dylan. You heard? I heard. You're going outside the wire this time. I'll be with Cole's element on the west compound. Dylan's face tightened. She could see the fear working behind his eyes. The same fear she had trained out of his hands, but couldn't train out of his heart. Dylan, look at me. He looked. If casualties come in, and they will come in, you run that trauma bay exactly the way I taught you. You don't wait for me. You don't look for me. You work. Every second you spend wondering where I am is a second your patient doesn't have. What if you're one of the casualties? Rachel didn't flinch. Then you treat me the same way you'd treat anyone else. One breath, steady hands, save the life in front of you. Rachel, I can't. You can. You proved it 6 days ago. You're not the kid who froze anymore, Dylan. You're a combat corpsman. Act like it. His jaw set. She watched the fear recede and something harder take its place. The transformation she had been building in him since day one. Copy, Staff Sergeant. Good. And Dylan, I'm coming back. That's not a promise. That's a guarantee. At 1400, Torres found Rachel in the armory. She was checking an M4, the same one Gomez had given her during the first attack. Torres leaned against the doorframe and watched her field strip the weapon, clean each component, and reassemble it in under 60 seconds. You know, most intelligence specialists I've worked with can't do that blindfolded. Who said I can't do it blindfolded? Torres laughed. Then the laugh faded and something serious took over. Donovan, I need to say something to you before tomorrow night. Then say it. After Daniels died, this team changed. Cole changed. We all did. We closed ranks so tight that nobody could get in. We told ourselves it was discipline. It was unit cohesion. But it wasn't. It was fear. We were afraid that if we let someone in and they weren't good enough, we'd lose another brother. That's not fear, Torres, that's grief wearing a uniform. Maybe, but the result was the same. We shut out everyone who wasn't us, including you, especially you, and you were the best thing that walked onto this base. Rachel slid the magazine into the M4 and set it on the table. Torres, I didn't take it personally then, and I don't take it personally now. That's what makes it worse. You should have taken it personally. You should have been furious. Instead, you just showed up every day and did the work and waited for us to catch up. That's a kind of strength I don't think any of us understood until it was too late. It's not too late. We're here. We're planning together, fighting together. That's all I ever wanted. Torres pushed off the doorframe and stood straight. Tomorrow night, wherever you are on that compound, I've got your 6. I know you do. Semper Fi, Anvil. Hoo-yah, Torres. He grinned. A SEAL saying Semper Fi to a Marine. A Marine saying hoo-yah to a SEAL. 7 months ago, it would have been unthinkable. At 2200, the night before the anticipated attack, Rachel sat in her quarters one last time. She had her kit ready. Body armor, helmet, M4 with 6 magazines. Medical pack strapped to her back because she refused to go into a fight without the ability to save a life. She picked up the photograph of Maria. She looked at it for a long time. Then she did something she had never done before. She turned the photograph over and wrote on the back with a pen, Maria, if I don't come back from this, tell Sophia her Aunt Rachel loved her. And tell her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that someone else's life matters more than your own fear. You taught me that. I'm still learning. She placed the photograph face up on the nightstand. She placed Maria's letter beside it. She placed Daniel's patch next to both. 3 tokens, 3 lives connected by the same truth. She slept for 2 hours. Real sleep. The deepest sleep she had gotten in 3 years. As if something inside her had finally settled. At 1 o'clock, the base went to tactical readiness. Rachel moved to her position with Cole's reaction element inside the west compound. 12 operators in the dark, weapons ready, waiting for an enemy that didn't know it was walking into its own grave. Cole positioned his team in a horseshoe formation around the covert exit point. Rachel was on the left flank with Torres and Bishop. Gomez in the Marine security element held the right. Cole keyed his radio, voice barely a whisper. All elements, this is Sentinel Actual. Weapons tight until my command. Nobody fires until they're through the culvert and inside the compound. We let them in and we shut the door. Rachel controlled her breathing. Her heart rate was 62. She had checked it on her watch. Combat ready. The same heart rate she had in Fallujah before every patrol. Her body knew this rhythm the way a musician knows a song. At 1:47, the first explosion hit the main gate. Vehicle-borne, massive. Exactly where Rachel had predicted, the diversion. Rachel didn't react to it, neither did Cole. Neither did anyone in the reaction element. They held position and waited. At 1:49, movement at the culvert, Rachel saw the first shape emerge through her night vision. Then a second, then a third. Armed men crawling through the drainage pipe and emerging inside the compound perimeter, exactly as she had mapped. 4, 5, 6. They kept coming. Cole held. He let them come. 7, 8, 9. They were forming up inside the compound, 20 meters from the horseshoe. 10. Cole's voice, ice cold. One word. Execute. The compound erupted. 20 operators opened fire simultaneously from 3 sides. The attackers had no cover, no escape, no time. The engagement lasted 41 seconds. When it stopped, 10 men were on the ground, and the culvert was sealed by Gomez's element. But it wasn't over. At 1:52, a second wave hit the west fence from outside. Not through the culvert, over the top. RPGs streaked across the compound. One hit a vehicle 20 feet from Rachel's position. The blast threw her sideways. She hit a concrete barrier, felt her ribs crack, and tasted blood. Torres grabbed her. "Donovan, you hit?" "Ribs, I'm functional." "You're bleeding from your mouth." I said I'm functional. She got to one knee, shouldered the M4, and engaged. Controlled pairs. The same discipline that had carried her through Fallujah, through the first attack, through every moment that tried to break her. Cole was on the radio calling for air support. The second wave was larger than projected. Not 25, closer to 40. They had underestimated the force by 15 fighters. At 1:55, a call came over the radio that stopped Rachel's heart. Dylan's voice. Shaking but controlled. "Trauma Bay, this is Hayes. We have incoming wounded, 3 critical. I need backup." Rachel looked at the firefight raging around her. She looked at the trauma bay across the compound. Torres saw her face. "Go, we've got this." "Torres, the west flank." "We've got it. Go save lives." "That's what you do." She ran. Full sprint across the compound with bullets snapping past her. Her cracked ribs screaming with every stride. She covered 80 meters in under 15 seconds and hit the trauma bay door at full speed. Dylan was working on a Marine with a shrapnel wound to the neck. Blood was everywhere. His hands were steady. His face was focused. He was doing exactly what she had taught him. "Status," Rachel said, already pulling on gloves. "Neck wound, carotid involvement. I've got pressure on it, but I can't stop the bleeding. Second patient has bilateral leg wounds, tourniquets applied. Third is a SEAL, gunshot wound to the shoulder, stable." Rachel was at the neck wound in 2 seconds. She looked. The shrapnel had nicked the external carotid, not severed. Nicked, controllable. She clamped the vessel, packed the wound, and stabilized the bleeding in under 90 seconds. "Dylan, you kept him alive. The pressure you applied bought him the time I needed." "I breathed," he said, "just like you taught me." At 2:03, the gunfire outside intensified again. Then 2 massive explosions. Then silence. Then Cole's voice on the radio. "All stations, Sentinel Actual. Air support on station. Enemy force neutralized. West perimeter secure. Casualty collection underway." Rachel closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second of relief. Then she opened them and went back to work. Over the next 3 hours, Rachel and Dylan treated 11 wounded, 2 critical, 4 serious, 5 moderate. Dr. Park performed 2 surgeries. Rachel assisted on both while simultaneously managing triage. At 500, the last patient was stabilized. The last medevac lifted off. Fob's sentinel was secure. Again, Rachel walked out of the trauma bay with blood on her uniform, a medical pack on her back, and an M4 slung over her shoulder. She stopped in the corridor and leaned against the wall, and for the first time she let herself feel the cracked ribs. The pain hit her like a wave, and she gritted her teeth and breathed through it. Cole found her there. He was covered in dirt and sweat and someone else's blood. He leaned against the wall next to her. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then Cole said, "Your intel was right. West approach, culvert, diversion at the gate, all of it." I underestimated the force size. By 15, we adjusted. That's what good plans do. People got hurt. People got hurt. Nobody died. That's because of your plan, your training, and the corpsmen you built from scratch. Rachel pressed her hand against her ribs. "Senior Chief, can I tell you something?" "You've earned that right. The operation in Al Anbar, Crimson Gate, when I built that intelligence package, I never knew whose lives it would save. I just knew the data pointed to an ambush, and I couldn't let it happen. I spent 11 days piecing it together. I missed meals. I didn't sleep. I lost 8 pounds in 11 days because I couldn't stop working until the picture was complete. I didn't know that. You weren't supposed to. That's how intelligence works. You never see the person behind the data. You just see the result. But I want you to know, when I heard that the raid was successful, when I heard that every operator came home, I sat in a plywood office in Al Anbar and cried. Not because I was proud, because I was relieved. Because somewhere out there, a group of men I had never met were alive because of something I built with my hands. Cole's jaw tightened. He stared at the wall opposite them. I've told the story of that night 100 times. The ambush we preempted, the fight, the Silver Star, and not once, not a single time, did I think about the person who made it possible. Not once did I ask who built the package that saved us. I just wore the medal and told the story. That's not your fault. It is, because that's the same thing I did to you here. I looked at the result without seeing the person behind it. I saw a contractor badge and made up my mind. And the person behind that badge had already saved my life once and was about to do it again. We all have blind spots, Senior Chief. Mine almost got people killed. But it didn't, because you adjusted. You listened. You opened that door. That matters more than the mistake. Cole turned his head and looked at her. Staff Sergeant Donovan, when this deployment is over, I'm writing a letter to Marine Corps Personnel Command. I'm recommending you for permanent reactivation and assignment to a Joint Special Operations support element. You don't have to do that. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because the military needs people like you in positions where they can do what you do. Not hidden behind contractor badges, not invisible, seen, recognized, utilized. I spent 3 years trying to be invisible, and you spent 1 night proving that invisible is a waste of what you are. At 8 o'clock, Colonel Mercer held a final base formation. He read the commendations for the second engagement. He cited the SEAL team, the Marine Security Force, the medical staff, and the intelligence section. Then he said, I am awarding a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V to Staff Sergeant Rachel Donovan, United States Marine Corps, for extraordinary service during 2 separate enemy engagements at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Staff Sergeant Donovan's actions as medical provider, intelligence analyst, and tactical combatant directly contributed to the survival of wounded personnel, the accurate prediction and defeat of a coordinated enemy assault, and the overall defense of this installation. Rachel stood at attention. Mercer pinned the medal on her uniform. The formation applauded. Torres whistled. Bishop nodded. Dillon stood in the back row and wiped his eyes with his sleeve and didn't care who saw. Cole stepped forward after the ceremony and shook her hand in front of the entire base. "Proud to serve with you, Staff Sergeant. Proud to serve with you, Senior Chief." 3 weeks later, Rachel Donovan's deployment ended. She packed her bag in the same quarters where she had spent 7 months, being no one. She placed Maria's photograph in the bag. She placed Daniel's patch in her pocket. She folded Maria's letter and put it where she always put it, close to her heart. Dylan came to say goodbye. He stood in her doorway and tried to speak, and couldn't. "Come here," Rachel said. She hugged him, the kid who had frozen on day one, the corpsman who had saved 3 lives under fire, the young man who would carry what she taught him for the rest of his career. "You're ready, Dylan. You were ready the night of the first attack, and you've been ready every day since. Because of you. Because of you. I just showed you what was already there. Will I see you again? Guarantee it." Torres was next. He hugged her hard enough to make her ribs ache. Bishop shook her hand and said 4 words that meant everything. "You're one of us." Gomez saluted, Marine to Marine. Cole walked her to the transport. They stood together in the morning heat, the same heat that had hit her 7 months ago when she arrived as nobody. "Donovan, I have one question I never asked." "Ask it." "When you arrived here, you knew who I was. You knew about Crimson Gate. You knew I owed you my life. And you watched me disrespect you and dismiss you and try to remove you from this base. And you said nothing. For 7 months. That's not a question. The question is why." Rachel looked at him. She looked at this man who had started as her adversary and become her brother in arms, and she gave him the answer she had been carrying since the day she walked through the gate. Because trust that comes from a file isn't trust, it's obligation. If I had told you on day 1 that I built the package for Crimson Gate, you would have respected me out of debt, not out of belief. And debt runs out. Belief doesn't. She paused. I needed you to see what I could do, not what I had done. Because the next time a contractor walks onto your base and she doesn't have a Bronze Star or a combat record or a classified file, I need you to give her a chance. Not because of who she was, because of who she might be. Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver star. He held it in his palm. This has been mine for 3 years, but it was built on ground you laid, so half of it belongs to you. It always did. Keep it, Senior Chief. Wear it for both of us. I will. The transport arrived. Rachel threw her bag on board and climbed in. She looked back at FOB Sentinel one last time. The rebuilt South Wall, the West Compound where she had fought 2 battles in 6 days. The trauma bay where she had saved lives and trained a corpsman and found a purpose that went beyond any uniform. She didn't wave. She didn't salute. She just nodded, and Cole nodded back. 4 months later, Rachel Donovan was in her apartment in Tucson, Arizona. The apartment was the same. The nightstand was different. 2 photographs now. The first was Maria and Rachel in Fallujah. 2 young women who thought they were invincible. The second was new. Rachel in Marine Combat Utilities, standing with 12 Navy SEALs, a Marine security team, a Navy surgeon, and a young corpsman from Ohio. 2 families, 2 chapters, 1 truth. Dylan called her every Sunday. He was assigned to a new unit now, a Marine Expeditionary Force deploying to the Pacific. He told her he had trained 3 junior corpsmen using her methods. 1 breath, steady hands, pack the wound. They're calling it the Donovan Protocol, he said. Tell them to call it the Reyes Protocol. Who's Reyes? The woman who started all of this. I'll tell you about her someday. Torres sent her a message on the anniversary of the first attack. Still carrying Daniel's patch, Anvil? Every day. Good, so are we. Cole wrote the letter he promised. Marine Corps Personnel Command approved Rachel's permanent reactivation 6 weeks later. She received orders to a Joint Special Operations Intelligence Unit based in Virginia. The assignment would put her exactly where she belonged, behind the data that saved lives and beside the people who needed her. Before she reported, she drove to Arlington National Cemetery. She walked the rows until she found the headstone she visited every year. Corporal Maria Reyes, United States Marine Corps, beloved daughter, beloved mother. Rachel knelt in the grass and placed a small bronze pin beside the flowers someone else had left. It was the Combat V device from her commendation medal, the symbol of valor under fire. I kept my promise, Maria. Nobody died on my watch, not one. She touched the cold stone. Your daughter is growing up beautiful. Carmen sends me photos. Sophia has your eyes and your stubborn chin, and she told Carmen last week that she wants to be a Marine, just like her mom. Rachel pressed her forehead against the headstone. I'm going back in. Full active duty, joint special operations. I'll be doing what I do best, building the intelligence that brings people home. And every package I build, every life I help save, every person who walks off a helicopter instead of being carried off in a flag, that's you. That's always been you. She stood up. She adjusted her uniform. She touched the headstone one last time. Semper Fi, Maria. Always faithful. Always. Then Staff Sergeant Rachel Donovan walked away from the grave of the woman who changed everything, and she walked toward the rest of her life with steady hands and clear eyes and a heart that had been broken and rebuilt and broken again and rebuilt again until it was stronger than anything that had ever tried to destroy it. Because fire doesn't care what you wear. It doesn't care about rank or gender or branch or badge. It asks only one question. When everything collapses, are your hands steady? Rachel Donovan's hands were steady on the day she carried a wounded Marine through Fallujah. They were steady on the night she saved a hospital full of SEALs. They were steady on the morning she pinned on a uniform she thought she'd never wear again. And they were steady now, walking forward into whatever came next, carrying the memory of everyone she had lost, and the promise that no one else would die because someone wasn't ready. Not on her watch. Not ever. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one nobody sees until everyone needs them. Rachel Donovan was proof of that. She always had been. And the world was just beginning to understand what one woman with steady hands and an unbreakable heart could do when she decided that invisible was just another word for ready.